Police officers of Reddit, what absurd situation have you just happened upon and realized and no one called the cops? Story 1. I was off duty playing poker with some neighbors and friends. One of the guys at the table is a hard Vietnam vet. In the middle of a hand he downs his glass of scotch, hits himself in the chest, and lights a cigarette. He stands up and says, "Well, I'm having a heart attack." He then walks out and drives to the hospital. Everyone thought he was joking. Sure enough, he had and survived a heart attack. Story 2. I do mountain bike patrol in a smallish medium-sized city. Was just riding one morning just after rush hour and spotted a little kid probably 3 to 4 years old standing on the side of the road with no parents in sight. Stopped and asked him where his parents were, and he just kinda shrugged. Called it in, and some dude ran out of some townhomes across the street and said the little dude was standing out there for a few hours and he was watching him to keep an eye on him. There were people around and everything, but we never got a call for it. Long story short, he wandered out of the room him and his mom were staying in nearby and wandered out to the street. Place was a shelter for women, and he was able to get out past the manager and a court police officer. Mom had died from a heroin overdose 3 days prior, and when the little guy got hungry he got out of the room and wandered out to the street. No one even went to check on her either despite the smell. Edit because some people asked. I'll clarify, the shelter was not a homeless shelter. It was a shelter designed to house abused women and children temporarily that had nowhere else to go. Mostly it was designed to help bring them into the system by giving them a place to stay until their social workers and caseworkers can get them better accommodations, kind of like a more secure hotel. The women were free to leave and do their own thing, and there wasn't a full-service staff like in a homeless shelter or rehabilitation facility. Edit 2. Thanks to the kind Redditor who gilded me. But please help out someone else with your money. It's starting to get hot out, so go buy your local homeless dude some bottled water or donate to a charity. Finally, please go out and push your legislators and the people in power to fix our healthcare and rehabilitation system. Many millions of people suffer from our lack of ability to help those in need, especially the mentally ill and the neglected members of our society. Push for the end on the war on drugs to stop the cycle. Story 3. I'm really late to the party here, but 3 weeks after I started, I was on my way to our off-site property control, just driving through a residential area to avoid the congestion and take a look at my new beat. I drive past a house with smoke pouring out from the eaves and 2 guys watching across the street. They pointed at us as I stopped and said, "I think there's a fire." Think was an understatement. This entire house was filled with smoke, windows were black with soot, and still no call. These 2 guys were just chatting away and not doing anything. I couldn't see fire, but it was July 10th and a sunny morning. No mistaking a house fire in broad daylight, so I call it in and try to gain access and yell for any survivors. Keep in mind I have 0 fire training, but have half a brain enough to know that if there are any survivors in there I won't be any help to them, and will just be another body to yard out once fire does arrive. I get into the backyard by jumping over the hood of a minivan and sliding across like a Duke brother because there is so much junk everywhere. This takes a piece of the wooden fence and jams my radio key button open, so everyone can hear me breathing, yelling for survivors, etc. I have no idea I've got an open mic at this time. I lay down on the deck and look through the sliding glass door, and there is only about 4 inches up from the floor I can see. I continue to yell for survivors but get no response. As soon as fire gets there, they make a slow entry because the front door has been barricaded. This is when I knew something wasn't right. Suspicions were confirmed when firefighters yarded out 4 children, a mother and father. The father was the last one taken out and the only survivor. Everyone else, except an infant, had been murdered with a kitchen knife. Doing CPR on a child that you can see is obviously dead is something that will haunt me forever. I never thought I could take someone's life until I had to try and help a child that was murdered by his father. I've never wanted to choke the life out of someone more. Talking about it helps, but still hurts. Story 4. Started my 4 to midnight shift by heading directly to get a coffee. Beautiful summer day, people everywhere. I pull into the parking space and see a dude lying on the ground in front of a park bench. I jumped out of my cruiser, grabbed my first aid bag, and called it in. The guy was conscious but not really responsive. It sounds like a movie, but we were doing the old blink if you can hear me deal. The rescue finally arrived and took him to the hospital. I found out later on that the poor guy had suffered a severe grand mal seizure and was still postictal when I rolled up on him. The frustrating part was the dozens of people milling about that couldn't even bother themselves to call 911. Never mind, find out if the guy was okay. Story 5. Not in LA anymore, but was for about 12 years in a large city. When I was a patrolman, I got a call about someone shooting off fireworks in a strip mall at 2 a.m. These were common calls, so we would usually just go check the area and clear the call. I checked the parking lot and didn't find anything, but noticed the lights were on at one of the strip mall businesses. I won't say what business it was, but it was owned by a pretty prominent local businessman. Anyways, I got out to check and found the front door unlocked, which was suspicious. We had a lot of burglaries in that area, so I asked dispatch to call a rep for the business. I was clearing the building and found the owner and several other people all really prominent in a back room where a poker table was set up. One of the guys was sitting down and had a pile of coats in his lap, which was really weird, and he was acting like he was in pain. I saw blood droplets under his chair and asked him what was wrong. He broke down and moved the coats, then revealed he had a gunshot wound in his thigh. Long story short, these guys had a high-stakes poker game every week and someone tried to rob it and things went sideways. The dude robbing it shot this guy in the leg, which some citizen heard and called in a fireworks call, The guys involved in the game weren't going to call the cops and were arranging to have a doctor come treat him off the books. Gambling is illegal in the state I worked in, but we honestly wouldn't have given a, we actually caught the guy that did it, but the DA wouldn't prosecute because the victim witnesses didn't want to testify or be involved. The victim recovered fine. One of the guys who I interviewed told me that they were robbed of over $30,000. Story 6. So many. There's the usual drive-by shootings, gang violence, etc. to the infuriating child abuse, child exploitation matters. Though to be completely honest, the most absurd situation in which no one called the police 9/11 was when my crazy neighbors across the street had their father-in-law have a heart attack on their front lawn during a barbecue. The guy's son was having the mother of all tantrums, shoving people, screaming, rolling on the ground, pulling up grass, literally broke a window, all while shrieking at the top of his voice, "Please God, don't take my dad." The other relatives allowed this spectacle to unfold before their eyes while they formed a semicircle around this dude's seemingly lifeless corpse. I finally looked out my window, opened it, and shouted if anyone had called 911, got around 20 blank stares. I called for them, and the crazy son tried to attack the paramedics while they were loading his dad into the ambulance. Called the cops for them too. Common sense really isn't all that common. Edit: no, the dad didn't make it. The party still resumed once the son got carted off in cuffs and the ambulance had left. The son was also definitely old enough to know better. He was in his early to mid-30s at the time of this tantrum. Story 7. Former Elio worked a late shift and was driving home and decided to stop for some breakfast at Waffle House. I noticed a few people flagging me down as I pulled into the parking lot, which was shared by an auto repair shop. They point me to the back, so I pull over and turn my spotlight on. On the back side of the repair shop there was a dumpster, and there was a man laying down beside it behind the fence. I could see his feet. Then another homeless man walked out with a bowl and literally walked right by my car toward Waffle House. He was soaked BTW. So I walk over to the man laying down and he's unresponsive. I call in and EMTs arrive and the guy is dead. I still to this day have no idea how or why. I have the homeless guy waiting for me next to Waffle House and I ask him what happened and he said he was out cold. I was pouring water on him to keep him warm. Video from the auto shop shows guy walking and collapses next to dumpster. He wasn't shot or anything, so who knows, heart attack, stroke something, and for 45 minutes. This homeless man walked over to a water hose beside the Waffle House, filled a bowl up and poured water on him because it was slightly cool outside and he didn't want him to get too cold. Water was cold faucet water BTW. Literally nothing ever came close to the weirdness of that night in my entire career. Story 8. My father was a village policeman in the UK during the 80s. So this is his story. Lady bought a house and after many days weeks getting settled, she turned her attention to the garden. She started digging some flower beds, but as she was working she came across some small bones in the dirt, baby-sized bones. This house used to belong to a doctor. So the lady puts 2 and 2 together and assumes he was a child murderer or maybe did some off-the-books abortions back in the day. This lady is shocked and terrified that her new home could be tainted by this horrible past. But she didn't call the police. Instead she just avoids the garden completely. The whole thing weighs heavily on her mind as the years go by, 5, 10, 15 years, I forget how long exactly, but it was at least a decade until one day she can't take it anymore and calls the police to report the bones. My dad goes out to investigate, into the garden where she shows him roughly where they were. He digs around a little. This was the 80s and apparently they were less concerned with disturbing evidence and finds not a dead baby, but a small plastic skeleton. Poor woman had been living with guilt and fear for decades because of a kid's toy. Story 9. My uncle is a cop and likes to tell us about how in the 90s in Philly there was an area so poor and ghetto most cops just avoided it unless there was a call. Well, that's where he lived because rent was cheap and he was a 6'3", 240 former minor league linebacker. Yes, it's a thing. Here I've googled it for you since you guys apparently can't figure that out. He was driving through one day and saw something in a trash can that caught his eye. He drove back around one-way roads and there was someone behind him. He pulled up and looked for a few seconds, readjusted his glasses, looked, got out and walked to the can. Sure enough, he really was looking at a human foot sticking right up and out. He called it in. Cops were all over in just a few minutes. That's when some fat white woman and her very very thick accented Hispanic boyfriend came out, both shirtless, her in a bra. The guy screamed something that sounded like "Hey na hua frumder who fucked HMMPS" ranks the first part, which appears to be "Hey now you get away from there." That's when the 350-pounder 5'4" wilder beast came out charging the officer, scream crying to show some respect. Well, you run at cops you get a pair of bracelets and a timeout. So while she was in timeout they were able to get out of her that her kids were at school, her mother was supposed to watch them, her mother was a drug addict, her mother is now in the trash can. Story 10. Pretty common where I work. No one calls the police. Probably the most extreme was a shots fired call, extremely common on a certain street that we really don't go down without backup. We drive through and don't see anything. Then maybe 10 minutes later we get an anonymous call about a shootout inside a vacant house. We find the door wide open, covered in blood. We make entry and find an absolute bloodbath, blood, drugs, and casings everywhere. We recover an AK pistol that had been fired. There was evidence people had been dragged out. We only got the one call about it and no one showed up at a hospital later, shot. Story 11. Obligatory. Not a cop. A Leo friend rolled up on someone darting tree to tree in a pretty well-to-do neighborhood. Spotlighted the person. Just in time to see the young woman put a gun in her own mouth and pull the trigger. It hit him up enough for him to pursue a different career. Story 12. Another one. I was responding to a disturbance call in a trailer park that turned out to be BS. As I was leaving I noticed a giant puddle of blood on the ground near a different trailer. Upon further inspection I realized that there was blood all over one of the doors complete with smeared handprints and blood dripping off the door. It looked like a massacre. I started pounding on the door and this junkie comes out and starts yelling at me for waking her up. I asked her if she was hurt and she said she wasn't. She then proceeds to go ape about all the blood. She has no idea where it came from. I followed the ungodly amount of blood to a trailer about a block down where there is a giant party taking place. I asked the group of guys standing outside where the injured person is and they all go G-code on me and say they don't know what I'm talking about while standing in the blood trail. I push past and continue down the road to Oz where at the end of it I find a guy in what used to be an all-white outfit that is now dark red attempting to control his massive head bleed on his own. I later discovered that he had been trying to break into that other trailer when he drunkenly cut his head on the window that he broke out. Story 13 years ago I was at a wedding, and the groom was a cop. There was a guest at the wedding who was the one of a friend of the bride. The reception was so much fun, with several hours of open bar at a big hotel. The one guest was walking around, inviting people to go out to his car to smoke a joint. At one point, he walked up to a couple guys and invited them, to which they responded no thanks, we're cops. That was a fun night. Not a cop, I'm a paramedic, but I think this fits. My partner and I were at our post which was in the parking lot of a strip mall that had a bunch of stores and one bar which was known to be pretty sketchy. My partner was taking a little nap. It was around 1 a.m. and I was watching a movie on my phone, waiting for a call. Eventually I notice a few people coming out of the bar and just sort of lingering in the parking lot. A few more people come out. One lights up a cigarette and they all just stand around. I go back to my movie and 20 minutes later I notice there is now a much larger group lingering outside of the bar. Nothing strange was happening, but I thought it was weird that they'd all been there for so long, so I decided to check it out. I woke up my pissed off partner to have him pull our rig closer to THED group. As we approach with our lights on, the group notices us and starts to break apart. A few people scatter, and I see that in the middle of the group there is a person on the ground motionless. My partner and I jump out and ask what's going on. Somebody in the group goes, "This guy is wasted. He just stumbled out here and fell asleep on the ground." I shout to the man on the ground and he doesn't respond. I check for a pulse and there is none. I start CPR, while my partner gets our jump bag and notifies dispatch. For a full 30 minutes, people had just stood around looking at this dead guy on the ground, some smoking cigarettes, none doing anything about it. There wasn't even a noticeable commotion. Nobody asked if he needed help or called anybody, and they probably never would have. The guy was cool to the touch by the time we got to him. Down for at least 30 minutes. We went through the motions but there was no saving him. We transported and he was pronounced at the hospital within 15 minutes. How hard is it to ask someone if they are okay, or to dial 911? How was not one single person in that group not alarmed by seeing a man sleeping on the ground in a parking lot? I've had similar variations of this scene happen at least 3 times while on duty. People just don't give a. Story 14. Not a cop, but this question reminds me of this absurd situation on Cops where they get flagged down by a lady who says she got ripped off trying to buy crack. The best part is the end of the video with a surprise twist. Story 15. Not LEO, but investigate issues in child daycare centers. Staff members duct taped a 1-year-old toddler to a chair because they wouldn't sleep at nap time. One staff member witnessed the other staff do this to the child. 3 other staff saw the child taped to the chair. The owner saw it as well. No one said anything or reported to police. My office is civil, not criminal. I called the local jurisdiction and submitted all documentation I had found. The parent picked up the child and couldn't figure out why the child's clothes had a sticky residue on them. Boy was she surprised when she learned what happened to her baby. Story 16. Obligatory. Not a cop. Went for a walk with my folks about 12 years ago. Small town. Went through a tobacco farm, found a bone. Looked like a femur, poking out of the dirt road. Called the cops and showed the cop what we found. He took it, not bagged, no statement, and said he knows a guy who can take a look at it. Never heard anything else about it. Story 17. Real and current cop. Heard some screaming, saw some kicking around in a car, blood was everywhere. I helped a lady give birth with an ambulance present. Saw a starving man collecting cigarette butts. I heard his story. I bought him food and we shared stories. It was 1 a.m. and 20 degrees. I took him to hospital because his feet were numb, saved him from frostbite and hypothermia. Saw a swerving SUV approach a ditch. Female got out and ran to the bridge. Tried to make a shitty noose. I talked her out of killing herself. Some girl flags me down at a gas station. Says her friend needs help in hotel room. I follow and get rescue to stand by. Bare naked girl handcuffed to bed. They have no key. I keyed her while embarrassed watched. Car drove by, no lights. Rammed a gate to water tower area. Drunk teen was arrested. Later admitted to wanting to poison the water reservoir to kill his ex. He would not have succeeded since he had no poison. I saw fire under car. Pulled them over. Rushed up and pulled everyone from car. Helped take kids out of the back. They were dragging a mattress they ran over. Heard gunshots. Went to area. Saw shot kid and frantic witnesses pointing. I drove to their points and saw a guy jogging. Commanded him to stop. Placed into handcuffs. Was the murderer. I have hundreds more, literally. Edit for more stories I can think of that fit the OP question. Frantic middle-aged lady with several kids in car waved me down one morning when I was going home. She told me a bomb was put outside her garage. I have her wait somewhere and check out her place. Find a fire extinguisher with a Coke bottle duct taped to it. Closer inspection reveals destroyed Coke bottle and was probably filled with dry ice. I suspected friends of her kids. I patrolled a neighborhood I never went through before, completely by random decision as I passed it, saw a flash of skin run across the roadway. I chased a naked guy to a playground where he tried to hide in sand, confessed that he was a minister for some shitty small church. He was booked that night. I called the church in the morning, they seemed to not care. I posted about it on FB and linked the public records from the courthouse as proof. Local news had fun with it. Flagged down by a schizoaffective individual once. Claimed he had been abducted by aliens. Had zero identity but was in a panic, so rescue checked him out. He told them the same info that didn't register through the state's MVD or any of our reports. While he's in the van, another officer arrives with a fingerprint scanner. We find he's not in any database we have access to. Now we assume he just did drugs or something. Gave me an address to tell his family what hospital he will be at. Described the cars and driveway. It's across town, so I hit it up hours later on my way home. Described cars are present. Knock on door. People have no idea who he is. I described him and everything. Nope, I just left, never saw him again. Had to help the county with calls one night because they had a major incident that tied up all their people. I'm not used to taking calls without addresses. There was one with directions like turn right at barn, go past rusted truck, etc. I follow the directions to contact a person about a simple theft that occurred at their work or something. I go to the wrong house and interrupt a barbecue. It was like 2 a.m. I stop at a skate park with problems to do my reports and be present so no one shoots each other. Kid gets shot anyway. I heard a soft, muffled pop. I was like, nah, that's not a gunshot. Moment later, kids rush to my car pointing to the park, find a non-skater type thug inside one of the deep bowls, blood smeared on some areas of the concrete. He couldn't get out because he shot himself in the leg while putting his gun in his pocket. He got a ticket for negligent use $150, but he got another bill from the ambulance, $1,500. I would prefer the misdemeanor ticket myself. I heard screaming from a parking lot one night. I see a man and woman fighting. I observe for a moment and wait to intervene. The woman is definitely instigating and throwing all the blows. The male is backing away and telling her to stop, but she is yelling help and for someone to call the cops. Well, here I am. I arrested her for domestic violence. Guarantee if people called police for her they would give me false testimony. Yes, she was the one needing help. He was hurting her, blah blah. Glad I witnessed it myself. On my way to the jail outside of the city one night I saw 3 pickup trucks on the side of the road. I drove closer and nearly choked in surprise. About 5 guys, 3 with rifles, stood on the side of the road looking into a ravine. I could have sworn they were murdering someone. I honked my air horn from afar, ready to gas it out of there since I have a prisoner who is my liability. The guys all drop their guns and walk to the road. I get out ready to draw down, but feel like they're respecting me at this point. One guy approaches. As he does, I hear death cries coming from the ravine. He tells me one of their cows got loose and fell into the ravine and broke its legs. It had been there for a few days before they found it. I nodded and blocked traffic while they put the poor girl down. I was called to a hotel to check on a room who was getting frequent guests not registered. The manager also did some Googling of the registered person's name. It was a 19-year-old college girl, pleasant looking, well-mannered on her FB page. Nice-looking family, had a back page listing for in service, was in college for biology, drove a brand new Tacoma. To mind you, manager wants me to remove any other guests in her room. I knock on door, she answers in a robe. I explain the manager's suspicion. She laughs and says she's from out of town, just visiting a friend and he came over a few times to say hi. She allows me to do a quick look inside her room for guests. I come out of the bathroom and notice she closed the door and dropped the robe. She is completely naked and looks pretty good. She says can stay and chat a while or something like that. Cannot remember exactly as this was 2013 to 14. I declined and left. I have really haunting, terrible scenes I have been to as well, some of which were on national news, so it's not all fun and games. Bodies cut up into pieces, people hung, heads blow up with shotguns, lots of suicides, lots of murders, lots of car wrecks and mayhem, sadness that has caused this cool guy some PTSD, mostly nightmares, and the occasional sad day, but I live for the happy moments, the fun times in the job, the people whose lives I actually save. The smiles and handshakes, there have been quite a few that are alive because of me. I know if it wasn't me it would be another cop from my department, but still it was me, and it makes me smile. Story 18. My first year on the job, I was patrolling in a frat house neighborhood near a big Midwestern college. It was a Friday night on a football weekend, so we had our eyes peeled for any gatherings that looked potentially chaotic. Sure enough, we pulled onto one smaller block with a narrow street, where there were no less than 5 simultaneous keg stands happening right in the middle of the road. Several neighbors were looking out their windows with angry looks, but clearly none of them cared enough to get any of us on the horn. Good thing we stopped by, because several dumb kids were passed out and needed medical attention immediately. But wait, it gets better. Of the several intoxication arrests I made that night, one of them happened to be the daughter of one of my dad's best buddies. They had been roommates at that exact same college years before. That arrest, which wasn't her first one, caused her to get expelled from the college, and word somehow got back to my dad that I was the cop who had randomly stopped by and made the arrest. When I went to my parents' house for dinner the following week, my dad greeted me by beating me senseless with a pair of jumper cables. Story 19. My coworker's story of how he found out he had a heart defect. I forget what it exactly was jumps out to me. He used to ride his bike to work all the time at his old job. One day just on his to work he drops on the side of the road, fainted. He was out for an hour or so before he came to. He was pretty beat up, nothing major, but cuts and bruises everywhere. When he came to, no one was around him. People driving by, people walking around. No one stopped to help, no one stopped to call an ambulance. He went to the doctor and got surgery done for an artificial heart valve. Story 20. Ex-officer here. Got called to a noise complaint and my partner and I knock on the door as it's actually pretty rowdy and could be heard across the street. Turns out there was a hen's night full of drunken 30-somethings and the cop stripper was running late. That took more explaining than it should have, but they eventually turned the music down. Story 21. This will probably get buried, but I'll share anyway. Finally getting some time to eat my lunch after a fairly uneventful evening. Pull alongside a liquor store to enjoy my meal in peace. As I pull in, what do I see in my headlights? A vagrant with their pants down taking a, not the absurd part. I look down and see another person below him. He was shitting on his sleeping friend. I backed my car out and parked further down the street. Story 22. Not a cop, I was the guy they walked up on, and I wasn't doing anything illegal or worthy of calling the cops, but I guess it was questionable enough to take a quick detour to, so we'll start by saying I used to live in California, and Fresno was one of the places I lived at. This had to be back in '06 or so. At the apartments I lived at, I never really had many issues, but I guess further in at the back of the complex in those buildings some shady was going down. At least once a month the police copter was hovering over this place spotlighting the area, and I never really knew why until much later. I moved into a unit in their sister complex in '08 and got to talking with the head maintenance worker in charge of both places and got the beans spilled. Crazy meth head doing weird psycho like selling the washer-dryer units provided in the apartment for money, straight crashing through his sliding glass door. Weird with him and the people he had there. Place was large enough and I was clear on the other side of it. I had no idea, but I guess some of the antics going on back there were SWAT team worthy. So, the last of those Star Wars prequels had come out on DVD still somewhat recently. And for some reason one of my buddies thought it would be cool and fun to choreograph lightsaber fights. Just because we were silly nerds in our early 20s. Figured if we got some moves down we'd spend some cash on some good prop lightsabers to spar with. But we basically used Boken sticks he ordered up. Actually, come to think of it, our first version was a couple dowels and a small 5-inch long or so pipe at the bottom for the handle and counterweight. But those broke quick and he found the Boken sticks online that were more durable and meant to hit each other for sparring and hold up. So usually we'd end up doing this. Just about hitting each other with these god sticks like idiots and choreographing up these moves would follow. We happened to be doing this on police helicopter night finally, and they spot us about with these sticks. Spotlight lands on us, we stop, look up, give a little wave, spotlight doesn't move, I look at my buddy, he looks at me, I shrug. We're not doing anything illegal, we go back into it. A minute later here come about 4 or 5 officers all in tactical gear with assault rifles. They were holding them pretty casually, but I guess they got sent to see if we were just about or if they happened to come across a fight during their call lol. They asked us what we were doing and saying we were practicing lightsaber moves sounded pretty dumb. So we told them we were practicing for a play pretty much dropped it at that. They asked me where a building number was, and told us we should probably just go inside for the night, and off they went. Edit, fine. A TLDR buddy and I in our early 20s decided to play lightsaber with sticks, had a police chopper provide us with our very own stage light and got rolled up on by a group of SWAT there for a different call to make sure we were just being goofy dumb shits and not having a legit fight with sticks. This was only a few years back. Driving along a suburban road one night and a guy wearing only his underwear ran up to our cop car and threw a very large sofa cushion at us. As we slowed down to find out why he had thrown said cushion, he tried to jump into the back of the car. We got out and had a chat to the poor guy who told us he had used about an 8-ball of poor quality cocaine and wanted to get out attention to help him. Kicker was he had been running around the suburban streets all drugged up for about 30 minutes, and no one thought it was odd enough to call us. To be fair, it wasn't the nicest area. Story 23. Not a cop, but this is my uncle's story from early 90s Chicago. Elderly couple calls and what they said sounded like a gunshot from the apartment below them. My uncle and his partner arrive on the scene and enter the apartment. Weapons drawn, standard protocol for a possible shooting in progress. Right in the entryway is what's left of a middle-aged Italian gentleman who apparently made the decision to end his life by shooting himself in the head with a .45 revolver. He's obviously dead. According to my uncle, his face was basically blown in half, nose missing, one eye gone and the other hanging from what's left of the socket. My uncle's partner goes out to the squad car to radio for the cleanup crew, the guys that come and scoop up the dead guy. My uncle stands at the door making sure no one enters the apartment until they arrive. About 5 minutes pass and my uncle hears what sounds like something moving inside the apartment. He figures the guy probably has a cat or a dog. Your pet will eat you if you die and they are hungry BTW, so he heads back in to shoo it away so it doesn't further damage the guy's body. He opens the door and the mother with his face blown in half is standing there. My uncle reached for his sidearm and nearly shot the guy thinking he was a zombie or something. The guy just collapses again. Not like fall into a slump sort of collapsed. Like fall straight back hits with a thud sort of collapsed. My uncle, after regaining his composure, radios his partner to call for EMS and then he proceeds to check the guy's pulse. Nothing. When EMS arrived, they said there was no way the guy should have survived the initial shot and that they would have assumed he was dead too based on the amount of damage. My uncle says in his entire 20-year career, which included several shootouts and car chases, that he never felt more scared than when he opened the door and saw that guy who by all rights should have been dead standing there. Story 24. I wasn't on duty. I was driving to work. There's never traffic at this time, but I saw a bunch of cars stopping and avoiding the lane up ahead. That's because an idiot motorcyclist had been splitting lanes when we were all going 70 plus when he lost it, had his head go under the wheel of the SUV, and it had exploded. I roll up, get out the car, and some guy is like, "He's dead, dude," and I tell him no kidding as I call it in. Nobody else had.